Chapter 2. The rain had been falling steadily for several minutes before Mary noticed it and switched on the windshield wiper. At the same time she put on the headlights. It had gotten quite dark all suddenly, and the road ahead was only a vague blur between the towering trees. Trees? She couldn't recall a stretch of trees along here the last time she'd driven this way. Of course that had been the previous summer, and she'd come to Fairvale in broad daylight, alert and refreshed. Now she was tired out from 18 hours of steady driving, but she could still remember and sense that something was wrong. Remember. That was the trigger word. Now she could remember dimly how she'd hesitated back there about a half hour ago when she came to the fork in the road. That was it. She'd taken the wrong turn, and now here she was, God knows where, with this rain coming down and everything pitch black outside. Get a grip on yourself now. You can't afford to be panicky. The worst part of it was over. It was true, she told herself. The worst part was over. The worst part had come yesterday afternoon when she stole the money. She had been standing in Mr. Lowry's office when Tommy Cassidy hauled out that big green bundle of bills and put them down on the desk. 36 Federal Reserve notes bearing the picture of the fat man who looked like a wholesale grocer, and 8 more carrying the face of the man who looked like an undertaker. But the wholesale grocer was Grover Cleveland, and the undertaker was William McKinley, and 36,000s and 8,500s was added up to $40,000. Tommy Cassidy had put them down just like that, fanning them casually as he announced he was closing the deal and buying a house as his daughter's wedding present. Mr. Lowry pretended to be just as casual as he went through the business of signing the final papers, but after old Tommy Cassidy went away, Mr. Lowry got a bit excited. He scooped up the money, put it into a big brown manila number 10 envelope, and sealed the flap. Mary noticed how his hands were trembling. Here, he said, handing her the money. Take it over to the bank. It's almost 4 o'clock, but I'm sure Gilbert will let you make a deposit. He paused, staring at her. What's the matter, Miss Crane? Don't you feel well? Maybe he had noticed the way her hands trembled now that she was holding the envelope, but it didn't matter. She knew what she was going to say, even though she was surprised she found herself actually saying it. I seem to have one of my headaches, Mr. Lowry. As a matter of fact, I was just going to ask if it was all right if I took the rest of the afternoon off. We're all caught up on the mail, and we can't make out the rest of the forms on this deal until Monday. Mr. Lowry smiled at her. He was in good humor. And why shouldn't he be? 5% of $40,000 was $2,000. He could afford to be generous. Of course, Miss Crane. You just make this deposit and then run along home. Would you like me to drive you? No, that's all right. I can manage. A little rest, that's the ticket. See you Monday, then. Take it easy, that's what I always say. And in Pig's ear, that's what he always said. Lowry would half kill himself to make an extra $1, and he'd be perfectly willing to kill any of his employees for another 50 cents. But Mary Crane had smiled at him very sweetly, then walked out of his office and out of his life, taking the $40,000 with her. You don't get that kind of an opportunity every day in your life. In fact, when you come right down to it, some people don't seem to get any opportunities at all. Mary Crane had waited over 27 years for hers. The opportunity to go on to college had vanished at 17 as Daddy was hit by a car. Mary went to business school for a year and then settled down to support Mom and her kid sister Lila. The opportunity to marry disappeared at 22 when Dale Better was called up to serve as Hitch in the Army. Pretty soon he was stationed in Hawaii, and long before he began mentioning this girl in his letters, and the letters stopped coming when she finally got the wedding announcement. She didn't care anymore. Besides, Mom was pretty sick by then. It took her 3 years to die when Lila was off at school. Mary had insisted she go to college and come what may, but that left her carrying the whole load. Between holding down a job at the Lowry agency all day and sitting up with Mom half the night, there wasn't time for anything else. Not even the time to note the passing of time. But then Mom had the final stroke, and there was the business of the funeral, and Lila coming back from school and trying to find a job, and all at once it was Mary Crane looking at herself in the big mirror and seeing this drawn, contorted face peering back at her. She'd thrown something in the mirror, and the mirror broke into 1,000 pieces, and she knew that wasn't all. She was breaking into 1,000 pieces, too. Lila had been wonderful, and even Mr. Lowry helped out by seeing to it that the house was sold right away. By the time the estate was sold, they had about $2,000 in cash left over. Lila got a job in a record shop downtown, and they moved into a small apartment together. Now you're going to take a vacation, Lila told her, a real vacation. No, don't argue about it. You've kept this family going for 8 years, and it's about time you had a rest. I want you to take a trip, a cruise maybe. So Mary took the double S Caledonia, and after a week or so in Caribbean waters, the drunk, contorted face had disappeared from the mirror of her stateroom. She looked like a young girl again. Well, certainly not a day over 22, she told herself, and what was more important still, a young girl in love. It wasn't the wild, subdued thing it had been when she met Dale Belter. It wasn't even the usual stereotype of moonlight on the water person generally associated with the tropical cruise. Sam Loomis was a good 10 years older than Dale had been, and pretty much on the quiet side, but she loved him. It looked like the first real opportunity of all, until Sam explained a few things. I'm really sailing under false pretenses, you might say, he told her. There was this hardware store, you see. Then the story came out. There was the hardware store, a little town called Fairville up north. Sam had worked there for his father with the understanding that he'd inherit the business. A year ago, his father had died and the accountants had told him the bad news. Sam inherited the business all right, plus about $20,000 in debts. The building was mortgaged, inventory was mortgaged, and the insurance had been mortgaged. Sam's father had never told him about his little side investments in the market or the racetrack, but there were only two choices: go into bankruptcy or try and work off the obligations. Sam Loomis chose the latter course. It's a good business, he explained. I'll never make a fortune, but with any kind of decent management, there's a steady $8,000 or $10,000 a year to be made. If I can work up a decent line of farm machinery, maybe even more, I've got over $4,000 paid off already. I figure another couple of years and I'll be clear. But I don't understand. If you're in debt, then how can you afford to take a trip like this? Sam grinned at her. I won it in a contest. That's right, a dealer sales contest sponsored by one of these farm machinery outfits. I wasn't trying to win a trip at all, just hustling to pay off creditors. But they notified me I caught first prize in my territory. I tried to settle for a cash deal instead, but they wouldn't go for it. Trip or nothing. Well, this is a slack month and I've got an honest clerk working for me. I figured I might as well take a free vacation, so here I am, and here you are. He grinned and sighed. I wish it was our honeymoon. Sam, why couldn't it be? But he sighed again and shook his head. We'll have to wait. It may take 2-3 years before everything's paid off. I don't want to wait. I don't care about the money. I can quit my job, work in your store, and sleep in it too, the way I do. He managed to grin again, but it was no more cheerful than the sigh. That's right. Rigged up a place for myself in the back room and lived on baked beans most of the time. Folks say I'm tighter than a town banker. But what's the point, Mary asked? If you live decently, it would only take a year or so or longer to pay off what you own. Meanwhile, I have to live in Fairville. It's a nice town, but a small one. Everybody knows everybody else's business. As long as I'm in there pitching, I've got their respect. They go out of their way to trade with me. They all know the situation and appreciate I'm trying to do for my best. Dad had a good rep in spite of the way things turned out. I want to keep that for myself and for the business and for us in the future. Now that's more important than ever, don't you see? The future, Mary sighed. 2 or 3 years, you said. Sorry, but when we get married, I want us to have a decent home, nice things. That costs money. At least you need credit. As it is, I'm stretching payments with suppliers all down the line. They play ball as long as they know everything I make goes towards paying off what I owe them. It isn't easy and it isn't pleasant, but I know what I want and I can't settle for less. So you'll just have to be patient, darling. So she was patient. But not until she learned that no amount of further persuasion, verbal or physical, would sway him. There the situation stood when the cruise ended, and there it had remained for well over a year. Mary had driven up to visit him last summer. She saw the town, the store, the fresh figures in the ledger. It showed that Sam had paid off an additional $5,000. Only $11,000 to go, he told her proudly. Another 2 years, maybe even less. 2 years. In 2 years she'd be 29. She couldn't afford to pull up Bluff, stage a scene, and walk out on him like some young girl of 20. She knew there wouldn't be many more Sam Loomises in her life, so she smiled and nodded and went back home to the Laurie agency. She went back to the Laurie agency and watched old man Laurie take a steady 5% on every sale he made. She watched him buy up shaky mortgages and foreclose, watched him make quick, cunning, cutthroat cash offers to desperate sellers, and then turn around and make a fat profit on fast, easy resale. People were always buying, always selling. All Laurie did was stand in the middle, extracting a percentage for both parties just for bringing buyer and seller together. He performed no other real service to justify his existence, and yet he was rich. It wouldn't take him 2 years to swallow an $11,000 debt. He could sometimes think as much as 2 months. Mary hated him, and she hated a lot of the buyers and sellers he did business with because they were rich too. This Tommy Cassidy was one of the worst, a big operator loaded with money from oil leases. He didn't have to turn a hand, but he was always dabbling in real estate, sniffing the rest of somebody's fear or want, bidding low and selling high, alert to every possibility of squeezing out an extra dollar rental or income. He thought nothing of laying down $40,000 in cash to buy his daughter a home for a wedding present, any more than he thought about laying down a $100 bill on Mary Crane's desk one afternoon about 6 months ago, and suggesting she take a little trip with him down to Dallas for the weekend. It had all been done so quickly with such bland and casual spirit that she didn't have time to get angry. Mr. Laurie came in and the matter ended. She never called Cassidy off in public or in private, and he never repeated the offer, but she didn't forget. She couldn't forget the wet-lipped smile on his old fat face. And she never forgot that this world belonged to the Tommy Cassidys. They owned the property and they set the price. $40,000 to $1 for a wedding gift, $100 tossed carelessly on the desk for 3 days rental privileges for the body of Mary Crane. No, bitch. So I took the $40,000. That's the way the old gag went. But this hadn't been a gag. She did take the money, and subconsciously she must have been daydreaming about just such an opportunity for a long, long time. But now everything seemed to fall into place as though part of her preconceived plan. It was Friday afternoon. The banks would be closed tomorrow, and meant that Laura wouldn't get around checking on her activities until Monday when she didn't show up at the office. Better still, Lila had departed early in the morning for Dallas. She did all the buying for the record shop now, and she wouldn't be back until Monday either. Mary drove right to the apartment and packed. Not everything, just her breaks, clothes in a suitcase and a small overnight bag. She and Lila had $360 hidden away in an empty cold cream jar, but she didn't touch that. Lila would need it when she had to keep up the apartment alone. Mary wished that she could write her sister a note of some kind, but she didn't dare. It would be hard for Lila in the days ahead. Still, there was no help for it. Maybe something could be worked out later on. Mary left the apartment around 7. An hour later, she halted on the outskirts of a suburb and ate supper, then drove in under an OK used car sign and traded her sedan for a coupe. She lost money on the transactions. Lost some more early the next morning when she treated a performance in a town 400 miles north. Around noon when she traded again, she found herself in possession of $30 in cash and a battered old heap of crumped on the left front fender, but she wasn't displeased. The important thing was to make a number of fast switches, cover her trail, and wind up with the junker that would take her as far as Fairvale. Once there, she could drive further north, maybe as far as Springfield, sell the last car under her name. How would the authorities trace down the whereabouts of a Mrs. Sam Loomis living in a town 100 miles from there? Because she intended to become Mrs. Sam Loomis quickly, she'd walk on Sam with a story about coming into the inheritance. Not $40,000, that would be too large a sum and might require too much explanation, but maybe she'd say it was 15. And she'd tell him Lila had received an equal amount, quit her job abruptly, and gone off to Europe. That would explain why there was no sense of inviting her to the wedding. Maybe Sam would balk about taking the money, and there'd certainly be a lot of awkward questions to answer, but she'd get around him. She'd have to. They'd be married at once. That was the important thing. She'd have a scene then. Mrs. Sam Lewis, wife of the proprietor of a hardware store in a town 800 miles away from the lottery agency. The lottery agency didn't even know Sam's existence. Of course they'd come to Lila and she'd probably guess right away, but Lila wouldn't say anything, not until she contacted Mary first. When that time came, Mary would have to be prepared to handle her sister, keep her quiet in front of Sam and the authorities. It shouldn't be too difficult. Lila owed her that much. For all the years Mary had worked to send her through school. Perhaps she'd even give her part of the remaining $25,000. Maybe she wouldn't take it, but there would be some solution. Mary hadn't planned that far ahead, but when the time came, the answer would be ready. Right now, she had to do one thing at a time, and the first step was to reach Fairvale, and scale up. It was a distance of a mere 4 inches. 4 insignificant inches of red line from one dot to the other. But it had taken her 18 hours to get this far, 18 hours of endless vibration, 18 hours of peering and squinting in a headlight glare and the sunlight reflection, 18 hours of cramped contortion, of fighting the road and the wheel, and the dulling, deadly onslaught of her own fatigue. Now she had missed her turn and it was raining. The night had come down and she was lost on a strange road. Mary glanced into the rearview mirror and caught a dim reflection of her face. The dark hair and the regular features were still familiar, but the smile had gone and her lips were compressed to a taut line. Where had she seen that drawn, contorted countenance before? In the mirror after Mom died when he went to pieces, and here all along she thought of herself as being so calm, so cool, so composed. There had been no consciousness of fear, of regret, of guilt, but the mirror didn't lie. It told her the truth now. It told her wordlessly to stop. You can't stumble in Sam's arms looking like this, coming out of the night with your face and clothing giving away the story of a hasty flight. Sure, your story is that you wanted to surprise him with the good news, but you'll have to look as though you're so happy you couldn't wait. The thing to do was to stay over somewhere tonight, get a decent rest, and arrive in Fairvale tomorrow morning, alert and refreshed. If she turned around and drove back to the place where she made the wrong turn-off, she hit the main highway again. Then she could find a motel. Mary nodded to herself, resting the impulse to close her eyes, and jerked her head, scanning the side of the road with a blur of rain-swept darkness. That's when she saw the sign. Set beside the driveway which led to the small building off the side. Motel. Vacancy. The sign wasn't lit, but maybe they'd forgotten to switch it on just as she'd forgotten to put on her headlights when the night suddenly descended. Mary drove in, noting that the entire motel was dark, including the glass front cubicle on the end which undoubtedly served as an office. Maybe the place was closed. She slowed down and peered in, then felt her tires roll over on one of those electrical signal cables. Now she could see the house on the hillside behind its motel. Its front windows were lighted, and probably the proprietor was up there. He'd come down in a moment. She switched off the ignition and waited. All at once she could hear the sudden patter of the rain and sensed the sigh of the wind behind it. She remembered the sound, because it had rained like that the day Mom was buried, the day they lowered her into that little rectangle of darkness. And now the darkness was here, rising all around Mary. She was alone in the darkness. The money wouldn't help her, and Sam wouldn't help her because she'd taken the wrong turn back there, and she was on a strange road. But no help for her. She made a grave now, and she must lie in it. Why did she think that? It wasn't grave. It was bed. She was still trying to puzzle it out when the big shadow emerged out of the other shadows and opened her car door.